Drive stopped being just a movie a long time ago. Today, it's a cult film, almost a modern classic. It managed something rare. It connected with both festival critics and regular audiences, and its impact on pop culture was so strong that it's hard to imagine the cinema of the 2010s without it. How did Nicolas Winding Refn rethink the crime thriller genre? Why do the shadows of Tarkovsky and David Lynch loom so large over this film? How did Ryan Gosling's nameless driver turn into a symbol of an entire era? And finally, the big question: did he actually survive the ending? That's what we're going to break down in this video.
What do you do?
I drive.
Long before people started calling him the king of slow noir, Nicolas Winding Refn was making very different kinds of films. In the Danish Pusher trilogy and Bleeder, he worked in a harsh, social realist style, showing the dark and ugly side of life in Copenhagen. Marginal characters, deliberately rough handheld camera work, and almost documentary-level violence made these films feel closer to street reportage than to the polished, stylish cinema Refn would later become known for. Before Drive, this phase of his career was all about searching. Nearly every international project was an attempt to figure out his own voice as an auteur. Fear X felt like a conscious step toward David Lynch. Valhalla Rising looked like a hypnotic reimagining of Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev, only set in a Viking world. And Bronson turned into a postmodern prison fable about the nature of violence.
I'd managed to cost the system tens of millions of pounds in damage, and Her Majesty no longer wanted to pleasure herself with Britain's most expensive prisoner.
All of these films share the same core idea. At the center is always a lone man going through an existential breakdown, choosing violence as a way to redefine who he is. Drive is essentially about the same thing, but it changes the setting and the cinematic language. Instead of an abstract space, we get a tense, nighttime Los Angeles. And instead of social realism, the film enters a conversation with classic genre movies from the second half of the 20th century. You can easily spot familiar archetypes in the main character. There's the cold detachment of Clint Eastwood's characters from Sergio Leone's westerns, the restrained masculinity and physical presence of Steve McQueen. The minimalist direction and stripped-down style clearly echo Le Samurai with Alain Delon, as well as Michael Mann's neon noir, especially Thief. And that's just the surface. Beneath it all, Drive carries the DNA of Roger Corman's exploitation films, the tough crime thrillers of John Borman and Walter Hill, and of course, Scorsese's Taxi Driver, where the city isn't just a backdrop, but a character in its own right.
Whatever it is, he should clean up this city here, because this city here is like an open sewer, you know? It's full of filth and scum.
Refn uses Los Angeles the same way, as a force that shapes the hero, presses in on him, and ultimately mirrors his inner state. Here you can also feel the influence of pulp fiction, clearly hinted at in the opening title design, along with 80s-style synth-pop and deliberately vintage fashion. Just look at the driver's iconic jacket. It alone says a lot. It points at the same time to the avant-garde cinema of Kenneth Anger and to old Japanese bomber jackets. At first glance, Drive can really feel like a careful pastiche, a film built out of quotes and visual nods to great filmmakers of the past, but that's exactly where its strange power comes from. The movie creates a strong sense of déjà vu, as if we've already seen this story and these characters many times before. Then Refn starts playing with the audience's expectations. Viewers who came in hoping for a fast, energetic crime action film often left disappointed. Instead of a straightforward genre ride, they were given something very different. Slow, distant, almost meditative.
Scary. Hey, you want a toothpick?
According to the director, Drive was never meant to be just a genre thriller. It's closer to a dark fairy tale, or if you prefer, a modern fable. That idea is clear from the way the main character is written. He has no name and is usually referred to simply as the driver. There's no clear backstory, no detailed biography. The film deliberately takes away the usual explanations for why he does what he does. We learn who he is not through dialogue or emotional monologues, but through Ryan Gosling's extremely restrained performance.
I don't have wheels in my car.
Okay.
It's one thing you should know about me.
We'll put the tires on.
You got 5 minutes?
It feels like the driver never makes unnecessary movements. Every gesture, every look, every pause seems carefully calculated. He exists almost like a machine, designed to perform a specific task with precision. This is especially clear in the opening scene, where he calmly and without emotion lays out the rules of his job.
I give you a 5-minute window. Anything happens in that 5 minutes and I'm yours, no matter what. Anything happens a minute either side of that and you're on your own.
From the very first minutes, it's obvious we're not dealing with a typical charismatic criminal. Instead, he feels almost mythic. A man defined by function, living by a strict internal code he refuses to break, at least for a while. Even these short lines alone tell us a lot about the driver. He's obsessed with control, especially control over time. That's why one of his key symbols is a watch. Everything in his world has to be timed down to the second, with no room for improvisation or mistakes. Following the logic of a fable, he's a dual figure from the start. By day, he's a stunt driver and mechanic. By night, he makes his living through crime. After he meets Irene, another side of him slowly comes out. The ability to care, to form attachments, even a kind of quiet tenderness. But this humanity exists right next to something much darker. Inside him lives a brutal, animal-like violence, one he manages to keep under strict control for a long time. That hidden nature is exactly what the famous scorpion on his jacket represents. The symbol isn't random. It points directly to the fable of the scorpion and the frog. The frog, despite being afraid, agrees to carry the scorpion across the river. Halfway through, the scorpion still stings her. When asked why, knowing they'll both die, he answers simply, "Because it's in my nature."
Is he a bad guy?
Yeah,
How can you tell?
because he's a shark.
There's no good sharks?
No matter how hard he tries to change, he can't escape who he really is. This is where the character's real tragedy lies. No matter how hard he tries to escape the closed loop of violence, he never fully succeeds. Even choices that feel morally right end up putting the people he cares about in danger. He sticks to his own personal code. He avoids using weapons unless absolutely necessary, and he tries to make a living not by killing, but through skill, precise, almost flawless driving. But that balance collapses the moment the driver crosses his final line and chooses to act directly, using his fists.
Now you just got a little boy's father killed. You almost got us killed.
It's telling how Nicolas Winding Refn marks this turning point visually. Before the outburst of violence, the driver looks controlled and almost surgically clean. But after the first real break, that sense of order is literally washed away in blood. During these moments of transformation, Refn often uses soft focus, as if to suggest that this is no longer the same person we met at the beginning of the film. The final step is the mask, a clear visual signal that the hero has lost his human face. And the most disturbing moment comes in the elevator scene, where, along with Irene, the audience finally understands who this man really is and what was hiding behind his quiet restraint. At the same time, Ryan Gosling's character strangely remains a carrier of an almost old-fashioned knight-like morality. He feels like someone pulled straight out of dusty novels about honor and duty. In a world where everyone else lies, betrays, and acts out of self-interest, the driver is almost the only character with a clear moral compass. He helps Irene not so much out of romantic desire, but because he feels he has no other choice. It's simply how he's built. It's no surprise, then, that Drive still provokes mixed reactions. Some viewers see the character with irony, others take him completely seriously. For a large part of the audience, the driver became an idealized figure, almost a role model. By the 2000s, older versions of aggressive masculinity had started to look more ridiculous than inspiring. They were replaced by new kinds of heroes, and one of them was Ryan Gosling's character. The driver represents a new kind of cool, quiet, restrained, never showing off his strength, but carrying a strong sense of inner dignity. He's always ready to step in when someone needs protection. At the same time, this image has its limits. He's almost incapable of talking about himself or his emotions. Still, this closed-off loner turned out to be exactly the kind of figure his era needed. Something like a new icon for a dark, cynical world.
What do you got that the big professional race teams don't? I got the driver.
And if the driver is an abstract protagonist with a capital P, then the rest of the characters follow the same fable-like logic. Around him, you can clearly see familiar archetypes. A mentor who guides the hero, a straightforward villain who embodies evil, and a rival fighting for the woman's attention.
That's very nice. That's nice of you. Thank you. You're welcome.
What really matters is that these figures are far from being pure archetypes. The mentor is anything but a wise old guide, and the rival turns out to be much more complex than a standard antagonist. Oscar Isaac's character feels less like an enemy and more like a reflection of the driver himself, a possible double. Through him, the film shows an alternate path, what the driver's life might have looked like if he were less rigid and more willing to compromise.
Tell me where we start, where we're going afterwards. I'll give you 5 minutes when we get there. Anything happens in that 5 minutes and I'm yours, no matter what.
In the end, Nicolas Winding Refn deliberately refuses to deliver the clear moral lesson you'd normally expect from a fable. The open ending, long debated and endlessly memed, only deepens the sense of tragedy. If we knew for sure that Ryan Gosling's character survived, it would mean that after all the violence, he was granted a second chance. Instead, the uncertainty leaves the audience alone with unanswered questions. Where is he driving in the final shot? Is he really moving forward, or are we watching his final visions? Drive became a point of no return for Nicolas Winding Refn, and not just because of awards and recognition. This film essentially set the direction for everything he would do next. Refn didn't just fall in love with Los Angeles and return to it again in later projects. More importantly, even when his films take place far outside the US, it still feels like we're somewhere inside the Drive universe. And that's mostly because of the neon. Refn had experimented with color before, but here it becomes the foundation of the film's visual identity for the first time. What's interesting is that many scenes are shot during the day, in natural light, and yet it's the nighttime sequences, soaked in cold neon glow, that define the film's dreamy, distant atmosphere. Other stylistic choices support that same feeling. There's slow motion that, at first glance, doesn't seem driven by plot needs, and there are long camera moves in and out of scenes. All of this creates a strange sense of delay, as if time inside the frame moves differently. Like the directors of classic noir, Nicolas Winding Refn works heavily with shadows and visual ambiguity. In scenes with double exposure, he highlights the unsettling duality of the world, as if suggesting that reality on screen isn't stable. It feels like a clear nod to David Lynch's version of noir, where similar techniques were used to signal that what we're seeing might not be entirely real. And just like in Lynch's films, music plays a crucial role here. The songs don't just sit in the background, they quietly comment on what's happening. Night Call reflects how hard it is to express real feelings. Under Your Spell is about the hypnotic pull of love. A real hero questions what a true hero even is. And despite being labeled a crime thriller, Drive contains almost no action in its first hour. Instead of constantly building tension, Refn calmly shows the driver's everyday life, his work, his slow connection with Irene, and his early encounters with future enemies. It's as if the director deliberately refuses to rush the story, letting it unfold slowly and at a distance, as though the waiting itself matters more than the action.
Nice to meet you.
My hands are a little dirty.
In Drive, this approach isn't quite as obvious yet, but if you look at Nicolas Winding Refn's later work, it becomes clear that plot matters less to him than the feeling a film creates. What really interests Refn is a strong audiovisual experience, something that hits the viewer on an emotional and sensory level. In that sense, his films can be described as genre movies told in the language of slow, contemplative cinema. It's almost as if a crime thriller ended up in the hands of Andrei Tarkovsky, a filmmaker Refn has openly cited as a major influence.
Well, I liked the movie Stalker. That was pretty funky. It was, pretty crazy. It was like a science fiction without science.
As a result, familiar genre structures begin to dissolve. That's why Drive, just like Nicolas Winding Refn's later films, is full of deliberately long shots that can feel almost excessive. Following the tradition of slow cinema, Refn isn't so much interested in the events themselves, but in the flow of time. A big part of this comes from the chosen perspective. We experience almost everything through the main character's point of view, and so we feel time the same way he does. Look at the first robbery scene. The camera is tightly locked to the driver's perspective, with almost no outside viewpoints. That same logic likely explains the use of slow motion. The hero is so in control of the situation that there's no need for panic and no need for rapid cutting either. Overall, the film feels like it's built mostly out of static shots. And when the camera does move, its motion is precise and restrained, much like Ryan Gosling's character himself. It's telling that handheld camera work appears only once, in the nearly idyllic scene in nature, when the driver grows closer to Irene. Even there, the shake is barely noticeable. Refn uses visual space very economically, often adding depth through reflections instead of extra edits. The famous elevator scene also supports this subjective perspective. When the lighting suddenly shifts during the kiss, it feels like a visual hint that what we're seeing may not fully belong to objective reality, but to the driver's inner world. A brief glimpse into his private, almost dreamlike state. In his later work, Nicolas Winding Refn moves even further away from classical storytelling, building visuals that exist almost independently from the plot. Just look at his next film, Only God Forgives, again starring Ryan Gosling. For many viewers, it felt like an improvised, distorted sequel to Drive. To a lot of critics and audiences at the time, the film came off as such an unmotivated aesthetic exercise that it was basically torn apart on release.
One critic called them European. I thought they were shit.
Refn truly pushed this method to its limit later on, in television. His 13-hour series Too Old to Die Young, which he personally prefers to call a film, became the purest form of his approach. Yes, there is technically a story and some character development, but watching it, just like his later project Copenhagen Cowboy, is really about one thing above all else: the way Refn literally paints with light and color. Against this background, Drive can already be seen as one of the defining films of its century, and without exaggeration, the central work of Refn's career, even if we ignore the endless memes, which alone could prove its cultural impact. It was Drive that brought 80s retro aesthetics back into the mainstream and gave Ryan Gosling's career a major boost. The role of the driver became so iconic that it's hard to watch Blade Runner 2049 without thinking about Drive, while Gosling's Ken and Barbie almost feels like an ironic commentary on that same silent masculinity. And that's not even touching on the broader pop culture influence, from the quiet, deadly presence of John Wick to the neon-soaked style of Hotline Miami. But perhaps Drive's greatest achievement is its protagonist, a figure that's dark, tragic, and full of contradictions, yet strangely complete. He may well be one of the few truly meaningful heroes of the 21st century, a character in whom an entire era recognized itself.